Welcome, I'm glad you're here. This is Jenna from McGuire. Today I'm sharing with you some clever ways of doing stitching on your cards and some easy ways too. However, if you are not into stitching on cards, I totally get it. Just check the timestamp that I have in my description below. You can skip to that and just watch me pull these together into cards, and I have some tips and ideas to share with you for that too. But first, I'm going to start with the stitching. We'll do some basic stitching, ways to step it up a bit, some creative ways to use your stitching dies, and more. I've gotten a lot of requests to do another video, so here we have it. And I will share more samples of this over on Instagram as I create more. I do want to remind you that I am not an expert on embroidery or doing stitches. I just use terms that make sense to me and share what I find works really well with adding your stitches to paper. I will say, if you haven't tried stitching on your cards, I encourage you to do so. It can be very therapeutic and something that you can take on the go with you. I will start with basic stitches on these stitching dies and then also step it up and change it up for different looks. I will be using stitching dies from Spellbinders. They have the most amazing collection of dies that really make stitching easier, and you really don't have to think too much when you do it. This is the Stitch Joy die set, which is a new one. You have the large stitching piece, some smaller ones, and then the letters Joy that you could also use separately on a card. You simply run this through your die cut machine as you would any die, and it cuts the basic shape along with the holes for stitching, and it makes impressions of where the stitches should be, which I'll show you in a moment. I like to use the Spellbinders All in One tool, and I flip my die cut over and put it on a cloth and roll this tool across it, and that knocks out most of the dots. And I'll do the same with the metal die too over there on the right, because some dots will likely be stuck in that too. This is the older version of the all-in-one tool. I think they changed it and it's now white and gold, but it's the same basic tool. Keep in mind you could do this over your trash can instead. I find this easier, or you can keep all those little bits to put in a shaker card. Regardless, I do recommend cleaning out that die from all of the dots before using it again to make sure it cuts completely. Okay, so now I have two pieces here that I've already done. Notice that they are stitched differently. I'm going to use this opportunity to show you how you could do the basic stitching, which is the blue on the right, or step it up and add extra things to it, like I did on the red one on the left. This is just a way for me to demonstrate some different stitches, the basic and stepped up. I get a lot of questions about this, and I think it's fun to learn all this so that you can get more from your dies. Now, if you look closely at the die cut, the die makes impressions that are little lines of where you should do your stitches. You don't have to follow it, but I find that gives a really easy, effortless way to do your stitching. So there's little impressed lines between these holes. For the stitching, I like to use DMC 6-ply floss. This is what I used as a kid for cross stitching, and I like it because it's 6 threads together, so you can peel them apart and use as many as you want, depending on how thick of a stitch you want. I will link below to some different options of this type of floss and the storage that I do, those little bobbins. And you could also check out Waffle Flower. They have their own 6-ply floss now that comes in a pack that covers all the colors you could possibly need, which is a great starting point. To pull the plies of the floss apart, I just grab one and then pull the rest away. Here I've pulled out 2 individual plies or threads. I'm putting those 2 back together. This way they're not all wound up and it'll stitch beautifully. I like to fold that end over until it's like a double loop there, and then I feed it through my needle. Now there are many ways to feed through a needle. This is what I find works really well for me. I will link below to the recommended needle size for doing stitching on your cards. Okay, so now I've pulled those 2 strands through, and I'll put all 4 of the ends together like this, and my needle will be looped and attached on that other end. This is a nice way of doing it because your needle won't fall off as you stitch. This will end up giving me 4 plies of floss to stitch with because you have the 2 together folded over. Now to start the basic stitching, I think one of the easiest ways to start, especially if you're a beginner, is to use a little piece of tape to tape the end on the back. Easy C tape is great for this because it's very thin, so it won't add bulk. So now you just start your stitching following the lines that the die makes on the cardstock. You just go up and down from one hole to the next, just following those lines. You can't really see the lines here, but you will see them a few times later in this video. Now, there are a million of ways of doing stitches. Again, there's a lot of information out there. I'm just trying to keep it simple. For this example, I'm using the 4 ply of the floss. It's the 2 strands folded over, giving me 4 at a time. You can see how I get a nice thick stitch. If you want a thinner stitch, you could use 1 strand folded over, which will give you 2 to stitch with. The less you use, the thinner your stitch will be. Here the holes are pretty far apart, so I like using the 4 to get a more bold stitch. I'll show you later an example with just 2 ply. All right, so here I'm going to stop because I want to switch to a different color like I do in this example here. See how it switches to a lighter green? You don't have to stitch a whole area in one color. You can switch to different colors anytime. What I like to do is flip it over, tuck my needle under some of the stitching I've done, pull it through, and then cut off the excess. That way this end is secure too. I just leave the tape there on that first piece. It doesn't add any bulk. So there you have some basic stitching. Let's do another example. This time I'm going to start the stitch off a little bit differently and then step it up at the end. This time, instead of using tape, I'm just holding the ends of the string right along the back of the area I'm going to stitch. So right along the back of this little pine needle area. I will now start stitching, and what happens is I stitch over those ends, which will secure it there. You just want to make sure you hold on to the back of that thread long enough that you stitch over it before letting go. So I'm continuing here to do the basic stitching as we did before. I just didn't use the tape to start out with. After I do more stitches, like I showed you before, I will trim off the excess of that tail. We don't need it hanging there and it'll just get tangled up or kind of hang out of our stitching. So I'll just trim that down because I know it's tucked under the stitches I've done. Next, let's do some stepped up stitching of this same area to make it look different than the other pine needles I did before. I really like to find new ways to stitch on my stitching die cuts so I get more use from those stitching dies. If I'm going to invest in a stitching die, I want to use it many times. And to keep it from getting boring, I like to change things up. So here I decided to add an extra stitch from the end of one of the needles back to the center. This just makes that pine needle shape look a little more full, or it kind of makes it look like a holly leaf. So by doing these simple changes, simple additions, I can get a completely different look. Also later, I'll show you how to take this Christmas Joy die cut and give it a non-Christmas use. You'll see that I didn't complete these leaves because I wanted to have some of it be done in a lighter green. So I just switched to a lighter green thread and continue this stitching. Again, I'm using 2 threads together, meet all the ends up, and it'll be looped. So that gives me 4 strands that will end up being stitched onto our piece. To start this one, I just tuck it under the stitching I've already done on the back. So the tail of my strings is tucked under there. And I'll just hold it to make sure it doesn't slip out until we get a few stitches done. That's another way you can start stitching when you already have some stitching on your piece. So I will continue to finish this end off doing the same type of stitching that I did before. By the way, there are other types of floss out there that I sometimes use when stitching on cards, but not with these type of dies that have patterns. I will link to a video that talks more about that up here on the top right in case you want to learn about the different ways you can stitch on cards and what flosses you can use. Next, I wanted to do a few of the flowers on here. You can see well the embossed lines that show where to do stitching on these. But remember, those are suggestions. You definitely could change it up if you want. I'm going to show you a few examples. But first, let's do the stitching as it was intended. And I'm just following those embossed lines, going from that center point out to the end, and doing this until my entire petal is filled. You can leave it like this if you want, or you can add an outline. Let me show you a comparison. Here on my blue flower, I left it like that without an outline. But on the red flower to the right, I added an outline. So you have that option. I usually like to outline my flowers and leaves because I feel like it gives it more definition, but you have the option. It's faster to skip the outline if you want to. But here I thought I'd show you how I add the outline. I just go up the next hole and then back down the previous hole. Up the next hole, back down the previous hole. Up the next hole, back down the previous. And this will give me a very clean outline to this. There are other ways of doing this type of stitch, but I find this gives the best results when stitching on paper. It is really helpful that these Spellbinders dies emboss the line showing where the stitches should go, but it doesn't mean you need to follow them. Here I'm changing it up and doing X's across the petal. By forming the petal with the X's, I get a completely different look. In fact, I'll do a background of flowers like this later in the video. It's just fun to come up with other ways to stitch in these holes. Also, keep in mind you do not have to stitch on these panels. Now on this one I think it looks best stitched, but later you'll see some background dies that just create holes in a fun pattern that you can use as a background. You don't even have to stitch on them. After doing the X stitches, I just do an outline along the edge of this petal, and I have a different look than the other flower that we have on the top of this piece. For me, this is really fun, coming up with creative ways to use these dies. Next, let's talk about metallic thread for stitching. I usually use Altenew metallic thread. It comes in a pack with gold, silver, and then like a bronze. There is also metallic thread from DMC that's beautiful, it's sparkly. I'll link to both options below. These are just 1 ply thick. It's just a metallic thread. This stuff is a little challenging to use. I recommend doing this, the metallic thread, after you've kind of conquered the basic stitching on cards. What I like to do with this is fold it over so you can see it's too thick. So it's just 1 ply, fold it over so it's too thick. I don't like using more than that because it gets so hard to use. So here I am just doing a regular stitch from the center of this flower to the edge. But I want it to be thicker. I want it to be 4 thick like the rest of it. So I'm just doing another stitch right on top of it. You could take 2 pieces of this floss and then put it through the needle, fold it over, and that gives you 4 ply. But really, it gets all tangly. You can see how this thread separates so easy that I just prefer to do it this way. It just makes it much easier. So I'm doing each stitch twice to double it up. You don't have to if you don't want to, but I wanted this to be thick at the center of this flower. So I call this a little starburst stitch, where you have a hole in the center and then you're going out to each hole around it. When I stitch with this metallic thread, I do put a stitch through and then I hold the back of it right there with my finger. Otherwise, it starts to come loose right away, which will drive you a little nuts. So by putting your finger on the back of your stitching each time, it keeps it from going loose until you get a chance to tighten it by going to the next hole. So here is the result of that starburst with the doubled up metallic stitching. You could leave it as is, or if you want to, you can go around the outline just like I did on those leaves. This just kind of gives it a little more definition, totally up to you. I do usually end up outlining these starbursts, but I have a few examples where I don't, so you can see what it looks like with or without the outline. Because metallic thread is a little slippery, a little tricky to tuck in, you want to make sure it's really tucked in tightly behind your stitching, or do a double tuck where you tuck it in and then tuck it in again to really make sure it stays secure. Now there you can see on this red flower on the left, I did regular thread, not metallic, where I did that starburst stitching and an outline. For this blue one, at the center of the flowers, I didn't do the starburst, I just did the outline in silver. I planned to put a gem in the center. But for these blueberries, I skipped the outline, so it gives you a different look. Totally up to you, and I like the options. All right, now I wanted to show you one more fun way of changing up your stitching, and I'll be using the Spellbinders Stitched Alphabet die sets as an example. This is an amazing die set. Each letter is sold individually. You get the stitching die and a shadow die for it, or you can buy the entire alphabet as a bundle, and the savings and the value on that over at Spellbinders is pretty impressive. Now, I decided to cut the word hugs, and I'm using a lighter weight pink cardstock. So I decided to cut 2 of each die cut and glue them together before stitching. I do recommend doing this if you're using a lighter weight cardstock. Off screen, I did some basic starburst stitching on this G example, just like I showed you before, going from the center of the circle to the outside, filling it up. But I thought I'd step it up and show you how to change it to the look of the H over there on the left. There are many things you could do here, but this one's pretty simple and a fun way to use 2 colors. I have already stitched a dark pink starburst in the center of the circle as I showed you before. Now I'm coming up one of the outside holes with a light pink thread and skipping a hole and going down the next one. So I'll tighten that up and you'll see I skipped a hole. Now I'm going back up that skipped hole, and then we're going to skip the next one and go down. Then back up the hole we skipped, and then skip again from the top. So this is just a fun way to create a unique circle around your starburst. It gives a fun two-tone look, and I'll show you a few examples of this later in this video. You could do all kinds of creative stitches to make these look like flowers, but I really just wanted a way to add some unique look to this without too much bulk. It also looks really cool if you do the starburst with metallic and then do a color around the outside edge. It just gives you that shine in the middle. All right, now when we get to the last stitch, I'll go up our skipped hole. Then I'm going to go to the first hole we skipped and tuck it under the first stitch. And there we have a really cool look. I just really like the look of it. And I did this on all of the letters for hugs. I ran out of time to turn this into a card for today's video, but I wanted to show you how you could put these on a card. This is an A2 card, but they would work great on a mini slimline or slimline card too. You could even stack them. What I also think would be fun with these stitched alphabet letters is to give someone a set of cards with their initials stitched at the center, and they can give those on to someone else. Keep in mind you could also skip the stitching and just use these with the little holes as decoration on your card. Also remember there are shadow dies included for those letters. Now the words that I would recommend getting if you're interested in doing stitch letters is you can get X and O, and you can stack those. So we have XO and OX on your card. You could also get high, and then hugs is fun too. I will try to share some of the examples I make with these over on Instagram, and I'll put a link to my Instagram account below. You don't have to be on Instagram to check things out. It's something to keep in mind. So there's some stitching for you. I do have more stitching videos. I will put a link to the playlist up here on the top right, and I will show you more examples of stitching I've done creatively throughout this video. But now it's time to make some cards with these stitch pieces, and I'm going to show you how to use them creatively to get different looks. Let's finish off these joy cards. For the red one, I thought it'd be fun to use a brushed gold cardstock for the letters joy. This is a beautiful cardstock that has a soft gold sheen to it. It's from Spellbinders. I'll link to it below. I cut each of the letters for joy twice from this cardstock, and I'm gluing them together for dimension and then onto the center of our stitch piece. You'll notice when you look at this closer later that the dies actually make impressions of stripes on the letter, which really makes it cool looking, and you can use those letters on different cards too. Now let's do the background for this card. I thought a textured embossing folder background would be best. I have my Spellbinders Platinum die cut machine, which is a great machine. They have recently come out with a universal plate system, which is the platform you see here, along with a bunch of plates and shims. So you can use whatever dies and embossing folders you may have, and it makes it super easy to figure out what sandwich. Over on their website for the universal plate, they have a sandwich guide, so you can just look up whatever embossing folder brand you have, and you'll know exactly what sandwich to use. I'll demonstrate it in a moment. But first I have this Dazzling Dots embossing folder from Spellbinders. I love their embossing folders because they're 8.5 by 5.5. So you can emboss on a piece for a big card too. Well, I wanted it on this small A2 card size, 4.25 by 5.5 inches. But I wanted to make sure the pattern was centered on it. So on the outside of my embossing folder, I centered up into the pattern a piece of cardstock cut to the size I want, and I put little marks in the corner with a black Sharpie. Now anytime I want to emboss a card front, I just line it up with those little corner marks in the inside of my embossing folder, and I'm ready to use it. Now I have my universal plate system here, and I'm following the instructions here on using a Spellbinders embossing folder. Again, they have a guide on their website too. Super easy to follow and such a game changer because now I don't have to experiment to figure out what works best. I just follow their guide. And look at that beautiful embossed image. I'll show you another way of centering up the pattern later in this video. But first, let's do the background for this card. Then we'll assemble both. Instead of using an embossing folder for the texture on this background, I actually used a hot foil plate without the foil. This is a great way to get more from your foil plates or to use them if you don't have a foil machine. This is a Spellbinders Plaid Tidings foil plate. You can see it over there on the right. I'm adding a little moisture to my cardstock first with a baby wipe, just so that it doesn't crack as we do this process. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. I'm taping the cardstock onto the hot foil plate, but I'm not using any foil here. I actually have a video that shows more of how to do this and also how to add ink into the impression, which I'll link to here in the top right. Now, I found when using this new universal platform that I do this technique best with the basic platform base A, the F shim, the B platform top, then I put down my hot foil plate and cardstock, then the flexible mat. This is that one that allows it to make an impression, and that is the E piece, and then I finish it off with a C cutting plate. You could actually write that on the back of your platform base so you remember it in the future. That's what I plan to do. If you don't have the universal plate system, don't worry. You can definitely use the plates that come with the machine to make an impression with a die or hot foil plate. There you have this beautiful pillowy look that is done with a hot foil plate. Great for a background. Now, when I glue down textured backgrounds like this, I make sure to get glue all the way around the outside edge, even in the nooks and crannies, using a strong liquid adhesive. And then I put some along the raised areas on the back too. This just makes sure that it all holds down and doesn't fall apart. There you can see the adhesive I did. I put it in a lot of places, but very little in each place. I then added that to a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch top folding note card. And I like to put my MISTI on top of that and then something heavy on top of that too, just to give it pressure to stay connected as it dries. Now, a lot of people ask how to add stitched pieces to your cards. What I like to do is scribble some liquid adhesive on the back too. Not a thick amount that it would ooze out when you press it down, but rather just a little bit here and there on your stitched areas, especially on the thick stitched areas. You can see better here. That way, when I press it down, it'll grab hold all around. You won't have any pieces coming out, and you can be sure that it'll stay put. You can even use a die cut machine for that added pressure on top as it dries. For a sentiment, I use the Spellbinders Glitter Wishes hot foil plates. Now, I'm not going to show the hot foiling here in this video because it takes up too much time on this already very long video. So I will link to a video up here on the top right that shows how to do hot foiling with these little sentiments. I hot foiled one of the sentiments with silver matte foil, and I'm gluing that right over the word joy on the blue card. I just thought that added more to the card and created a focal point. For the red card, I added a few extra stitched pine pieces using the extra little stitching dies this set includes. Again, I recommend using a liquid adhesive for gluing any of this down. Something strong like the Gina K Connect liquid adhesive that I have in a fine tip bottle. Really works great for this. Let's look at the completed cards. Now, this blue one, the stitching is really how the dies direct you to stitch. Pretty basic, and you can see the beautiful results. I did switch up colors, so each flower has 2 shades of blue, and each of the pine pieces has 2 shades of green. That's an easy way to add extra interest. At the center of my flowers, I added a really sparkly silver gem and scattered a few around the card also. Check out that amazing texture that we get on that white background piece by using that impression with the hot foil plate technique. Such a great way to get more from your hot foil plates or use them if you don't have a machine. Now, here's the red card with the embossing folder background. I did put a foil sentiment on the inside. Now here I stepped up all of my stitching, adding the outlines, adding the extra stitches to the pine pieces, and this just really gives you a more complete look, but both are great. In fact, I'd love to hear which version you prefer more. You can leave it in the comments below. This is how I usually do mine because I like the stitching process, but either works. Just go with what you find easiest. Or maybe if you're a beginner, start with the simplest stitching and then step it up to more full stitching like this. I thought next it would be fun to use that joy die but cover up the word joy so it could be used for any occasion. I did a hot foiled sentiment on a white rectangle off screen. I didn't want to take up the time of showing the foiling in the video, but I did use this Spellbinders Cross Lines Cardfront hot foil plate set. You will see the background hot foil plate used in just a moment. Now I also did some stitching of the Joy using some fun spring colors, and I cut it apart. See how I just cut it in half? This way I can spread them out, put that rectangle sentiment in the center, and no one will ever know that the word Joy was back there. So I matted my sentiment on a black rectangle, and I'm gluing that right on top of our stitching, covering up any view of the word Joy. And I'll do the same here on the opposite corner with the other half of my stitch piece. It was amazing how easy this was to do. In fact, you could cut the little flowers and leaves out and just glue them anywhere on a card. You can cut around them easily. For the background of this card, I used that background hot foil plate along with Spellbinders Opal hot foil. It's hard to see in this video, but this clear foil has an iridescent shine to it. So it gives this shine on our white cardstock background. Now the shine is much more obvious on a colored cardstock. I'll show that in a future video, but I wanted something subtle on this background and really wanted to use that hot foil plate. All right, now I am putting adhesive along the back of all of my stitching here, and I put foam tape at the back center, so that's raised also. I'll now place this onto our card, and notice some of it hangs off. That's okay. I'll show you how to handle that in a little bit. I did cut off some individual flowers from another die cut and stitch that, and I'm just tucking those into some of the open areas. After completing the card, you'll notice that some pieces hang off the edge, so it won't fit in a regular A2 envelope. That's why I keep A6 envelopes on hand. They're slightly bigger. That white envelope there is A6 size. I'll link to my source below. But that allows me to make 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch cards, but have little pieces hang off the edge. Or if it has a lot of bulk, it gives it some more room. Up close here, you can see that opal hot foil in the background. I'm telling you, it's gorgeous in real life. I plan to use that opal a lot more. You can see the stitching that I did. I have my outlined flowers and then the leaves that I stepped up with the extra stitches. All of those berries there, I did that trick that I did on the hugs letters before, where I did the starburst and then did like that fun stitching around the outside edge in a lighter color. I also added silver baubles here and there just to fill things out and add some shine. This is a reminder that you can take your themed stitching dies and use them creatively for other occasions. All right, now for one of my favorite stitch cards. I love these stitching dies and they're fast to create something. This is a Spellbinders Stitched Ornament die set. It has all the pieces that you see here. You can cut the stitching holes from the center of a background panel or use the outline with it to create an individual ornament stitched die cut. There are also the extra pieces to decorate your card and even an ornament topper. You can see the die makes those embossed lines to direct you where you can stitch. You can definitely change things up, but for my example, I just followed those lines, doing the starburst stitching and outline stitching that I showed you at the beginning of this video. Again, there are fancy names for all these things. I'm just trying to keep this basic for folks who haven't done cross stitch or embroidery in the past. So I did some pink stitching on a bright blue ornament. You can see it up there on the top right. Then I used this detail die included in the set, cut it from a brighter blue piece of cardstock twice, glued that together for dimension, and glue that right on to the bottom of our ornament. And then I did the same thing at the top of the ornament. I love the details these dies have to offer. Keep in mind, I did outline stitching on all the open holes on this. You could leave those open and put a colored cardstock behind it that will save you time and still allow the pattern to look really cool. Lots of options with these. I'll show that in just a moment. For the background on this, I'm using one of my new favorite embossing folders. This is the Tufted 3D embossing folder from Spellbinders. This is again 8.5 by 5.5. One easy way to center up a pattern is to put your cardstock horizontal. It's easier to line up the pattern on that cardstock this way, or you can do the trick that I showed you earlier so you'll always remember how to place your cardstock inside of one of these folders. I like to get my embossed patterns lined up so they're equal on all sides. I think it gives a beautiful result. And look at how this creates a pillowy look. Super cool. I'll definitely be using it again. I trimmed that down and added it to a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch bright blue note card, and I'm gluing my ornament on top of that. You can see I already added a silver die cut ornament topper at the top of the ornament. I tucked a white leaf die cut behind it, and then I glued a white bow on top of that using some thread that I've probably had for 25 years. For a sentiment, I used the new Spellbinders Many Merry Christmas Sentiments. I like this because there are lots of unique sentiments for strips, but there's also the Merry Christmas and a die to cut those out. I'll just be using the Making Spirits Bright that I stamped with blue ink on white cardstock and added to the ornament. I also added some silver gemstones here and there on the ornament. This kind of puts it over the top. It's super elaborate, but this die is one that you could keep much simpler. You could even skip the stitching if you wanted to. I just really wanted to go all out with these bright colors and lots of shine. So my stitching was done with pink and blue thread, and the only metallic I have on here is our ornament topper that I cut from silver cardstock, and then the silver gems that we added. I love how that background really just makes it all pop. Here's another stitched ornament that I've made but haven't turned into a card yet. Here I only used silver and gold thread, and I didn't stitch all of the holes, and I didn't do any outlines, and that saved me a lot of time. And it still looks really cool. I can put a colored cardstock behind it, and that color will show through the openings, allowing them to pop. I did do silver cardstock for the detailed die cuts and added some gold gemstones. You could make this a keepsake ornament by stitching 2 pieces and gluing them together back to back and adding that to a card, and the recipient can keep that ornament for years to come. I'll link to a video where I show how to add a keepsake ornament to a card up here on the top right. All right, now it's time for some non-holiday cards using background stitching dies, which are always a favorite of mine. The best part about these kind of dies is you don't have to do the stitching, and it would look really cool as is. Or you can just do partial stitching. The sky is the limit. Now this is definitely my favorite. I love this background die. Lots of detail to it. Now it does come with an outline die to cut it to 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches wide, but I just cut my cardstock to that size and used the stitching die at the center. Now I did my stitching for this example off screen because it's the same thing that I did at the beginning of this video. The outlining, the petals, the starburst, all the same. The reason I did this is because these holes are closer together, so I wanted thinner stitches so you could see the detail more. But you can do whatever you prefer. Notice I didn't stitch all of the lines in the background. That way I could put it on gold cardstock and the gold would show through. So I made a note card from Simon Says Stamp matte gold cardstock that's white on the back, so when it's folded into a note card, it's white on the inside. I'm gluing my stitch panel right on top of that, and now I have gold showing through all of those open holes for a subtle bit of shine. For a sentiment on this card and many others in this video, I'm using the Spellbinders Mix and Match Sentiment die set, which I've used a lot in videos, and I use it so often I actually bought a second set so that I could die cut twice as fast. I do a lot of mass production, so that's pretty handy for me. For this card, I cut the word thank you from black glossy cardstock and added it to the shadow die cut from white cardstock. By adding that shadow die cut behind it, it allows my sentiment to stand out against the busy background. You can see the gold cardstock showing through all of the open holes and the detailed stitching that we did. The stitching's easy to do because I just followed the embossed lines the die makes. I did add some yellow pearls and gold baubles to the center of the flowers and the starbursts. This is definitely one of my favorite background dies to stitch, and I'll be using it a lot more, sharing it over on Instagram. I did want to do a second card with that same background die, showing how you can get a completely different look. Now on this one, instead of stitching at the center of each of those flowers, I thought I'd add some stacked die cuts. I love the hearts from this die set. In fact, they have a die that cuts 3 small hearts at once. So I cut some of those from dark pink cardstock and also some light pink cardstock circles. And I'm stacking those in the center of the flowers. This is just to give this a completely different look. This panel will go behind an oval frame. You can see it there to the left. So I'm cutting a little bit of the extra off of the edge of our stitching. In fact, I didn't stitch all the way up to the edge since we'll be covering it up. I'm putting glue on the back of that piece, and adding it to a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card. Now I can glue a white oval die cut frame that I created right on top. You could do any shape you want here. A heart would be fun too. If you used a smaller frame, you could limit the amount of stitching you have to do also. Now here's a closer look. Notice the petals of the leaves. I did that cross stitching to fill it in, like I showed you in the example at the beginning of this video. So that gives a different look to those petals. I also added some silver baubles and that layered hello die cut from the Mix and Match Sentiment die set that I just showed you. I love that both of these last cards were made with the same stitching die but have a different look. All right, let's move to another background die. This one's a great classic look, and here I show how to just stitch parts of it to change things up. This is the Spellbinders Diamond Argyle die. This could be used for so many different occasions. Now, I did some stitching on this that's pretty basic, following the guides that the die creates by making those little impressed lines. I haven't completed this one yet. I plan to finish it off screen by finishing those outside diamonds with like a light blue thread, just showing you the variety of looks you can get by changing up the stitch or changing up the colors you use. I'll be sure to share this completed card over on Instagram whenever I get it done. But first I have this panel that I really liked. It's a dark blue cardstock, and I just stitched some of the diamonds with yellow thread and gold metallic thread. I like how it creates that focal point in the center. I trimmed that down and added it to a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch top folding note card that I made from that brushed metallic cardstock from Spellbinders. I like that that gold again shows through all those extra holes. So this did not take long to stitch because I only did the select area and I didn't do any extra stitching like the outlines. I added the hello stacked sentiment in the center using that Spellbinders die set that I showed you before, doing the shadow in white to make it pop, and then the word hello in gold to make it match. I also added gold baubles to the center of the stitching to give it a finished look. You could definitely make this a holiday card if you prefer by changing up the sentiment in the inside, but I have this going to a special friend who loves these colors. And here is another example using that diamond background die. In this case, I cut a diamond section out of the background and I used an unstitched panel behind it. This is another great time saver. So I have the Spellbinders Essential Diamond die set. You can see it over there on the left. Lots of different sizes of diamonds. And I used one to cut out a diamond from the stitched piece. Now you could hand cut this if you wanted to, but I had these diamond dies and they line up perfectly. So I did some stitching off screen onto that diamond piece. Notice that the stitching doesn't follow the embossed lines like my last example. This time I did little X's, filling in the diamond and then doing an outline stitch around it. This is the same process I did on the leaves earlier in this video. I just did it in a diamond shape. So this gives a very different look to that background die. I glued that on top of one of the stitched die cuts, but I didn't stitch that. So this shows you can just use those backgrounds without the stitching. I did add a thank you sentiment to the center, but to be honest with you, I think this would make a great baby card. I have one more example for you. In fact, I showed me stitching this on Instagram in my Instagram stories, and many people asked to see the completed card, so I'm sharing it here today. It features the Spellbinders Fanfare Die. I like this one so much and thought of many ways to create rainbows on it, so I've already cut it several times from white cardstock. So these panels are ready to stitch, ready to go. I take my stitching everywhere. I take it when I travel, I take it when I'm in the car, I take it to baseball games. I've been known to stitch pretty much everywhere, even on a boat. So having things pre-cut is very helpful. On this one, I just did a few different colors, creating these little fun rainbows. And then I did an outline stitch or back stitch here with that silver metallic thread, again, doubling up that stitch so it's thicker. So to complete this, I added it onto a 4 1/4 by 5.5 inch white note card and then added the thank you sentiment in black and white. This time I used the shadow die with black cardstock. That makes it pop even more against the busy background. So if you ever feel like your sentiment is getting lost, try matting it in black first. I did also add silver gemstones to the base of those little rainbows, and I just love this fun pattern. You can definitely change this up in many ways to change the look of the card or for different themes. All right, there you have it. Lots of stitching, lots of ideas for using your products creatively. I hope this inspires you. You can find all of these supplies in my YouTube description below. I will link at the end here to my stitching playlist so you can learn more about stitching on cards, and I will link to my hot foiling playlist if you want to see hot foiling in action. Thanks for spending this long amount of time with me. I appreciate it, and I hope you have a wonderful day.